Hello, welcome to Experiential Destinations, the science, stories, and innovation behind the unforgettable. My name is Daniel Hirschmann. I'm your host. I'm the founder and CEO of the experiential innovation company Hirschmann. And today we are very pleased to have Valentina Culatti with us. She is the director of EMEA Creative Strategy and Global Sponsored Production at Snapchat. Prior to that, she spent almost 5 years at Meta, where she held the position of Director of Creative Shop in Northern Europe. And before Meta, she invested almost a decade at Innovation Production Studio, Unit 9, where she held the role of Managing Director and Director of the Board. Valentina, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you so
And
much for having me.
And instead of me, you've heard my little basic bio. I would appreciate it if you could please take some time to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history, how you got to where you are now, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. So I'd say that my story is a story of immigration, curiosity, and maybe powered by imposter syndrome, like the one of many, I assume. So I was born and raised in a small provincial town in northeast Italy. So if you know where Venice is, take 2 hours south drive on the coast. That's my hometown called Ravenna. And it's one
Right.
of those,
I lived in Treviso for like 2 years.
I didn't know, now I know. So
How
yeah, match
interesting is
made in
that? Not
heaven.
far from you.
Yeah, not
Continue,
too
please. I'm
far.
so sorry to
Not too
interrupt.
far. Interrupt me anytime because this is probably going to be long. I mean, probably the appearance fooled you, but I'm not in my prime anymore. Um, so, so it's one of those places where the life is very safe and quiet. I call it the swamp because it used to be a swamp. It was the Western Roman Empire capital, so very famous place once, but it was the 5th century and nothing changed since. It used to be a swamp, and basically the culture is digested there, right? So you find yourself surrounded by people that are deeply intellectual. They really go and discover the independent routes for culture, but then not much comes out of it, and not to the detriment of my fellow citizens. But that was my experience back in the days. So when you're 16, you know that you have two options. One is stay there forever because it's safe, like Ulysses and the sirens calling you, stay, stay. Or you leave as soon as you can, which is what I did when I was 18. I went to uni. I was lucky enough to be able to attend university. And what I studied was a new course, degree, called Science of Communication. And the person that was leading the course was Umberto Eco, who is a famous
No way.
semiologist and novel
Okay.
writer, or used to be. And I studied semiotics of cinema, of all things. And I learned from him probably one of the most important lessons of my life, that knowledge makes everything simple. Right? I was very nervous. The first semiotic lesson, I thought, I'm not going to know anything. And instead, the more you know, the easier it is to be clear, and because you adapt to your audience, right? So anyway, fast forward 5 years, because it was a degree for 5 years, and I am full of theoretical thinking and knowledge, and I feel so powerful. But then I have a moment of enlightenment. I'm like, oh, brilliant! What do I do with all of this? Absolutely nothing. But luckily, the universe sent me a great opportunity, which was the internet and the World Wide Web, and everybody was going crazy for the hypertext, a multimedia. So what did your curious and yet lacking confident student decided to embark into the unknown of the web? And I enrolled myself into this master degree, which was with the Faculty of Engineering, actually, and the National Broadcast Television, called Multimedia Content Design. Again, one of those long, long names. And I learned a bit of everything. So get your hands dirty with HTML, with a bit of post-production, and on the tail of that degree, I landed my first paid internship which was in post-production house. But I was in the DVD department. You know the DVDs, those things, that everybody was excited about, and then got forgotten.
They can almost be non-linear.
Yeah. And basically, we remember, super intellectual, heavily theoretical, getting with hands-on with stuff. I thought I would have conquered the world. My first job that paid the rent was very much DVD authoring. So I was connecting navigation menus, encoding and decoding films. I was grateful because it was paying my first, tiny flat without flatmates. But then after, I'd say, a couple of years of that, I relocated to Milan from Bologna. I'm like, man, I'm not satisfied here. So, and that's why I say a journey of immigration, I resigned. I always wanted to go to London. I got rid of a burden of a boyfriend that was really slowing me down. I will not open that chapter because
But I have so many questions. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. And so basically, I packed my stuff with my little cardboard suitcase. I didn't know anyone in London apart from a friend who kindly decided to share her room with me for a little time and some savings. So it was September, and I said, if by December I don't have a job, I'll have to go back with my tail between the legs. So again, leap of faith with little parachute. And so I was knocking at doors in Soho, and I managed to land a job. London has always been dynamic, maybe it was more dynamic those days. Particularly, I was allowed to move, without having a visa because we were still part of Europe. And I landed a job, which was, again, ridiculous if you think about that I had that role, was a product specialist for a software company that was developing the authoring tools for DVD. And my role was, I know. And my role was, it's really a joke. I'm so grateful to the manager that hired me. It was to provide online and on the phone technical support, right? For the poor, developers that were authoring DVDs in Soho. My English was incredibly scholastic, like really poor. And let's not mention the technical knowledge. And I was also doing trade shows, so like you are showing in a suit how to click buttons to the people that are coming to your stand. Great lesson of humility, as always. That's where you crack the English. I was in an office with 5 lads, learned the rule of the pub. I was in. And then again, I always talk about the universe because things are serendipitous, or were serendipitous at the time. And after a year of that, where I felt like, okay, I got my national insurance number, I'm here, I can pay my room, I'm established. Someone reached out and said, well, there is this shop in London. It's called Unit 9. The founders are all mixed nationality, but they met in Florence, so there is the connection, the Italian connection. And they are looking for an interactive producer who could help them open their operation in Italy, back in Florence. I'm like, of course, that's me now. Interactive producer, I had no idea about what it was. Advertising, let's not mention that. But because of my studies, I've always been curious about new technologies, new languages, creativity, art, how to experiment with them. At the time, I was writing for an art fanzine about new media art and stuff. So I'm like, sounds perfect, let's give it a go. And I had no intention of going back to Italy at all. That was the other thing. So basically, I lied my way in, and probably with the founders, Piero Frescobaldi and Yates Buckley, who became my mentors, it wasn't even a lie. They thought, okay, she's nice enough. She's got a network in Florence. So let's build something with that. So that's how I started my career, really, in this business. And I joined as a junior producer. And it was it was an amazing time, I'd say, because we were a group of misfits. Imagine, a boutique shop at the time where digital production was just starting and digital creativity and interactive. We're talking about 2 operating systems, 2 browsers, and we were doing flash banners and flash websites, right? And we had the best production companies, for whatever reason, placed in Europe. We had a lot of good shops in the UK, but also in Sweden, in Belgium, in France. We had the commissioning power in the advertising agencies from America. And then we had network of developers and creatives around the world, particularly in Asia. So what I liked then is it was a Wild West. There weren't, contracts, scope of works, legal, and it wasn't too complex in terms of the distribution, the platform, the technology. And we were doing everything with leftovers of broadcast budget. So, leftovers of TV commercial. Can you do me an activation? But make sure that it's a first, it's never been done before, and it's award-winning. And we were just misfits. And we weren't particularly interested in advertising, but it happened to us to develop that profile. And in my case, maybe, naively, and it took me a while to realize, and that's something that I share with the people that I happen to coach, is that I used to define myself in I am not. So I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer, but I am trustworthy and reliable and multitasking, so I can be a producer. And then I came to realize that these are all powerful assets, and being a producer is one of the most creative jobs on the planet, right? And what was fascinating at the time was also, so I started as a junior producer, ended up being the managing director of this company whilst I helped growing the business from the ground up. And I think key ingredients.
How many were you in the beginning when you joined?
I think we were 20, and then when I left, we were 200 plus, because you are scaling and contracting, keeping the core very lean, but then you're finding the people around that you bring in on a project base. So the core was needed for R&D, because the key of success was very much try to be ahead of the game on the next demand. What is it that people would have wanted to do? And so we started, as I said, with websites, and then we thought, apps are coming. Let's open our app division. Interactive video. We need absolutely to define our interactive video proposition. And I remember when we scored our first Cannes Lion in that space with Unit 9 Films, with the most shocking second a day for Save the Children, and with the brilliant Michelle Craig. And that basically was the beginning of it. And then we were like, are we going to be able to jump on the HTML5 wagon? Are we going to win that battle? When we saw the Wilderness downtown coming out, no, we're lost. We lost it. But then let's make sure that we are the first on VR. And so we open up the VR department, and we started with doing 360 stitching. The first thing that we did was for, I think it was Wear the Rose for O2. They were sponsor of rugby. And so we created a custom-made harness that was put on the shoulders of a dwarf rugby player, so that he could, but still we were fighting with motion sickness, and then the evolution of the game engine integrate the real-time player. So always being there. And I think the last thing that I set up before I left for the company was the experiential division that was integrating the online, the offline. We were doing crazy things. But again, the ethos was you will be asked to do things that you have never done. You cannot guarantee their success, but you'll always say yes, and and you figure out a way on how to do it, being driven by the curiosity of making it happen, yet the solidity of a thorough risk assessment. That's my mindset. I'm crazy enough to try and do things and explore in a pirate way, but I will always do a risk assessment, which is what I like, and I think maybe we'll touch on that, which is what I like now in the discourse around AI that Anthropic is developing, because it's very much like, if you're looking at risks, is because we want to exploit the potential for good, right? Anyway, so that was Unit 9, and it was like the school, the imprinting. I see a lot of those ingredients being part of who I am and what I do and how I think. And I met a variety of individuals as being part of my team, people that I've hired, or those that I cross paths with, like you, for instance, you know. And we're still in touch, and it's just joyful, you know, to be that dinosaur. So, say a decade after 4 years that I was managing director, I started becoming a bit restless, because when you become a managing director, you're still trying to ignite the same fire, but you realize that what you're looking at most of the time is P&L, and you are really, you know, driven by one mission, which is like paying the people that are working for you, creating, you know, a culture.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. So when they say, what is it that is keeping you awake at night? Well, actually, making sure that they can pay their mortgages. But anyway, and also, as much as I love them, it was like family. And when you're in family, then there is somehow the learning that has always been driving me was a bit stagnant. Even like the definition of self, because when you're always with your family, I don't know if it happens to you, you go back to your family and they are surprised because you are not behaving like you used to behave when you were 18. You're like, well, I'm not 18 anymore, right? So I needed to break out from that default and cut the umbilical cord and somehow assess my self-taught managerial skills in a space that was bigger, more, call it corporate. You know, tech corporate is different from, I don't know, probably banking, but it's still corporate. I needed to learn the lingo, jargon, and see if I was competitive in that context. Plus, anyway, so I was interested in joining tech, and again, the universe had Facebook at the time knock at my door. And I'm like, I'm not interested in social media, but I think they are very much the internet now. So let's go. And it was a very privileged journey because firstly, probably, how can I say, for the first time in my life, it was a deliberate choice, meaning I want to grow as a manager. They were giving me an opportunity to do that. And so the journey changed perspective. You don't have the allegiance that you have, like you have with the company that you're basically building, and you know your blood is the same color of the brand. And I learned a ton. I think whilst the decade Unit 9 was all about the craft and the exploration, I believe when I joined Facebook then and Meta, it was a lot about the strategy. And developing the business acumen, you know, because then you start leveraging much more not the insights, but the data science of things. But also because, again, the proposition was different. I wasn't running a business. I wasn't handling a P&L. I had the fantastic opportunity of studying creativity, right? And in the churn of supporting, you know, businesses and advertisers, we were also kicking off projects like the ethics of virtual influencers, right? And so, very actual. So a lot of learning. Or It was something around how AR is allowing self expression for certain, genders or just a pure innovation, or like do the first music video with AR effects shot in camera. So it was all of that. But again, to me, that was very much a growth in strategy and business acumen. And
May I ask,
yeah,
did you, so those are very prescient, obviously, in today's world, those specific kind of explorations
yeah,
that you were doing. And I wonder, so did you almost have a team of developers, creatives, etc., that were helping
yeah.
you to
So
kind of manifest this and explore these things, these ideas?
yeah, yeah. So we were part of what is still called Creative Shop, and
Hmm.
it's this function that supports sales in helping advertisers making the most on the platform. And the team was a team of creative strategists and also had the production part of it. And it was more a consultancy job, and we were all working a lot with the different ecosystems. So imagine, an advertiser come with their own ecosystem of partners, being that a creative
Hmm.
agency, a media agency. Some of them, they've got the internal shop. So it was campaign-driven work. It
Hmm.
was education for one-to-many. But also
Hmm.
we, at the time, and then things evolved, we were a learning function as well. And so we carved the opportunity for, investing time and resources on specific hypotheses like the one that I've mentioned. But also, to be honest with you, I'm someone that's been pushing for it, and that instance was brilliant because I was working under a very enlightened manager, Caitlin Ryan. I'm so grateful that our paths crossed, because I was given the time and the space to that. She was always protecting me, right? She got bruised
Amazing.
quite a few times because she hired a pirate that was like, I don't like the status quo. I need to rock the boat. Like I went in, and I think it was a lot of look-alike in terms of background of the team, and many of them had never worked with software engineers, let's not mention developers.
Hmm.
And so I try to diversify the team, the talent, bringing in creative technologists. And there is one that I'm still very close to now, is one of, I think, most talented AI artist that we have. And I hired him as a contingent worker for a maternity cover, Omar Kareni.
Hmm.
And he was like becoming miserable because he was trying to
Hmm.
conform, doing, the due diligence of the job. And I'm like, love, you're a contingent worker and I've hired you to be different. Can you please be more of a pirate? And then,
Different.
yeah, and that's where we started the exploration on virtual influencer. He
Amazing.
created one. So because that's the thing is the intellectual integrity of like you talk about something. Have you ever tried to do it, and that's the
Hmm.
beauty. So yeah, that was an interesting cycle, and I think I got more than I thought out of it in terms of
Hmm.
learning how to be a manager, but also learning how to be vulnerable in that context, leading a team in a certain way. And then, I said I'm not going to stay there more than 4 years. I stayed 4.5. And then Snapchat called. It felt like the perfect opportunity because Snapchat is still tech company. It's a public company, but the scale is smaller, and there is in terms of how many are we, and so there is more connection with the C-suite. Now I have this long title that you have recited in the bio, is like the Director for Creative Strategy, EMEA, and Global Sponsor Productions, which is a mouthful, but in essence, it's the same job with bigger remit because I am EMEA and global. And what I like
Right.
here is that it's smaller and mightier because it's
Hmm.
very much creativity driven, and
Hmm.
innovation doesn't happen by acquisition. It's very much like the
Hmm.
few people that are here that are trying to come up with new things all the time. And
Hmm.
also it's back to the roots of my curiosity and study, I've always been intrigued by how people interact and communicate, and Snapchat has been created as a visual messaging app. And that's the ethos, How is it that you communicate in a genuine way with your close circle of friends, and you're not broadcasting? So we play a lot with, again, AR, AI. So, yeah. And that's me.
Well, it's very interesting. Thank you for that.
It was a long journey, I told you.
Journey,
brace yourself.
Exactly. Journey through the career history that made Valentina who she is today. Excluding, of course, all the wonderful personal experiences that also contributed a lot. So,
well, who cares about my child, my husband? I mean, they are absolutely irrelevant in the story of my life.
No, they are 100% relevant. But I will pick up specifically on the professional side for now.
Of course.
One thing you mentioned at the very early part of this conversation was you talked about your curiosity and your willingness that you just kind of hinted at to act on that curiosity and to kind of, give the authorship to the teams or the individuals that you have in your team to be able to act on that curiosity. And I think that's a very interesting proposition, especially in today's world where these larger businesses, these large corporates, if you will, are quite, trying to create formulas or systems that control the outcomes to some degree. So I guess, you're in a small but mighty role right now, which I think is wonderful and kind of really gives you that potential to, push outside of that kind of constriction that could happen in a corporate. So I wonder, you've come through this journey, you're going through this process right now at Snapchat, which is very intriguing, I think, from your perspective, the way you described it. Are you able to kind of influence other parts of the business through this kind of approach? I mean, have you noticed it? And by the way, obviously not just about Snap, but other areas of your history. Have you noticed when there's a spillover from the kind of willingness to kind of push the boundaries?
Yeah. There is always that opportunity, but you have to be willing to put the effort in it. So imagine, depending on the size, when you are working in tech, teams tend to work in silos, right? That's a natural tendency. And the bigger the company, the more constrained and confined are the silos, because obviously the specific function are bigger and they're very busy doing, following their own agenda. And what I've noticed that the majority of the time for anyone is in a leadership position is to connect the dots. I really feel that I am an octopus many times. But that is, on the one end, tiring potentially and time consuming. But on the other, it's very much in line with what I believe creativity is, which is problem solving. And I do believe that you have more chances of landing on robust solutions if you look at things from different perspectives. So all this cross-functional work is something that I'm really loving. And so here, I like the fact, for instance, that the journey from as I said, craftsmanship to strategy is turning into a leadership one. And the leadership is, okay, fine, we are reflecting on concepts like, let's use AR as an example. Sure. AR is a differentiator for Snap. And what we are making a point around is that it's not a niche, but it's mainstream. So you have large, vast community, millions of people that are interacting with AR every day, and its behavior, it's like natural behavior on the platform. But it goes beyond Snap, It's estimated by 2025, the majority of Gen Z and Millennial will be heavy user of AR. So, observing how they behave, understanding how they engage, the fact that this is very much story living and you're immersing yourself in experience, allow us to then connect the dots between the consumer base, the community, the product development. So how do we want these AR, lenses that are served on the carousel to be? Do we want them to be very complex? Do we want them to be simple? Because we know what the behavior of the consumer base is, and so we inform advertiser, we educate advertiser. Back to the original, give me something that is innovation driven, never done before, la la la. Yes, there might be a space for that, but maybe simplicity is the best, because that's the nature of behavior. So that's what I'm enjoying at this point in my career, working in these companies where you elevate the conversation, because rather than when I was in the moments of campaign where you could never iterate on something or repeat something or better something because it was always a one-off, now you are able to impact on human behavior and develop products that are reflective of what they're engaging with, right? And then influence the industry when it comes to, the topic that is dear to our hearts, experience and experience design.
Right.
And really going into this space of immersion, like being immersed in something and being present in the moment. Now technology can help with that. Did I answer your question? Because I tend to
It
go
is. And
off.
it's actually kind of answering another question I was about to ask you as well,
Perfect.
which I'm going to state out loud anyway, because I think it's quite an interesting, almost bracketing of what it is that you just said, which is, in your over the last n number of years, we will never say how many, during your sort of your last few years exploring all these really interesting ways of telling stories.
They don't see me, so they will think that I am decrepit now.
No. Those who do see you will know it's not true. So you should watch the YouTube version. Anyway, there's a clear kind of history there over this time that you have been balancing innovation in technology with this authenticity in storytelling, and all ultimately in service of leaving an impression, a meaningful, lasting impression on audiences. And what you've shared is sort of almost like a thread, I feel, that can apply to, even though you use AR as the example, there's a thread that can be tied between, from the Unit 9 days all the way to your days now at Snap, which I think is really interesting. And I kind of, I almost had another question for you, which was when you were talking about Unit 9 and you did flash banners, right? And I was about to ask you this question around, well, is AR the kind of flash banner of yesteryear? What are you seeing at Snap or in your own life that looks like the kind of the next technology or the next new up and coming interesting things that you want to get your fingers stuck into?
My God, every single one is something that I want to play with, but then distill it back to its simplicity, so subtracting the obvious, but back to our friend John Maida, right? One of his rules of simplicity, you subtract the obvious and then you add the meaningful. So that is, a leading principle of everything we do in the team. So the AR space is interesting because of two main reasons. As I said, it's still perceived somehow puzzling as a tech paradigm, this is yet to land. No, actually, it's mainstream. And what's intriguing me is the evolution from the mobile device. So in its simplest term, as we know, AR is a digital overlay on the real world, and you can use it for different purposes. You can use it for entertainment, you can use it for education, you can have it as a tool. So imagine, AR lenses for try on,
Sure, try on, virtual try on,
Yeah, but then what is intriguing me is the evolution on wearables. So the fact that we are trying to get out of the mobile but putting it on the human body, getting, that circle, everything was externalized. The computers were gigantic, and now technology is allowing us to make it smaller and on you. And so that's one thing, the being present in the moment, the story living with something that it's got a pass-through. I'm thinking about the spectacles that we are developing. So you see the reality around you. You can enhance it in a with natural interaction. That's something. And then the other thing, again, it's AI, but the discourse around AI is super fascinating for me.
Mm.
Firstly,
Mhm.
because at the moment it feels like noise. It's
Mm.
very monotone because the voices are very similar, and the intention is to build a choir back to,
Mm.
different point of view, creative point of view. And then
Mhm.
there is, like, we were having a conversation yesterday. We were looking at someone who was part of a jury for a AR magazine. Super fascinating. We
Mhm.
were looking at some
Mhm.
of the entries, and she was making this point about, we are in the Renaissance moment. Everybody's obsessed with the craft at the moment, right? Does it look real? Does it have that,
Mm.
Gen AI look? But in
Mhm.
reality, the things that are the most interesting for me is the what if. And
Mm.
I was reading a post from Ray Inamoto, who's a friend, and he was saying something like, if you know exactly what you want to do and you do it, that's work of craftsmanship. And if instead you begin with a question and use it to guide, the adventure of discovery, that's art. And that's what I'm
Mm.
interested when it comes to AI. AI now, it's gold mining. Everybody's going horizontally because, again, is land
Mhm.
grabbing, is,
Mhm. Mhm.
let's try. But there will be a moment where you'll have to go deep, and
Mhm.
creativity will make the difference. And I'm really intrigued by emotional AI. I'm intrigued by. Yesterday I was reading was it yesterday? But recently, International Women's Day. I was reading an article which was about the women in Kabul, and there was this girl who is, I don't know, 18, and she's like, I don't speak with anyone anymore, and
Mhm.
I use AI as a friend for conversations, you know? So it,
Wow.
for
Yeah.
me, is that what if, back to the work that Anthropic is doing, that I am
Mhm. Mhm.
intrigued with, and we're trying to explore it where I am, with the team.
I mean, it's interesting. And then if you tie it back to what you're talking about that John Mader said, where you subtract the obvious, I think there's kind of this, it's an interesting thing because it's, as you say, it's quite horizontal. And in some ways, a lot of it is quite obvious,
Yeah,
even like remarkable, but obvious.
it
And
is.
so it's going to
It
be
is.
very interesting when everybody's finished shouting about it, and then it's about finding what those specifics are that become really, really valuable and intriguing and
Yeah.
meaningful when it comes to specifically AI, because obviously we started with AI, now we're talking about AI. I'm
But anyone,
fascinated by.
nobody
Mhm.
will remember, as we always say, back to, I'm really like going to the core of everything now. It's like
Mhm.
nobody will remember the technology for an experience
No,
that you have
no,
designed. Everybody will remember how you made them feel. And that is the core
100%.
principle.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's you're speaking to the choir there. I completely agree. The technology is ultimately a platform that delivers X, and X is the thing that you end up having an emotional reaction to, or
Yeah.
frustration with, or disinterest in, or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. And I think, going back to thinking about your sort of history, and I wonder, I'm intrigued by such the range of projects from DVDs all the way through to these discussions you're having about AI. Can you think of any great examples or that whether yours or other people's, where you felt like the technology melted away and revealed the most meaningful, magical, memorable, the three great M's experience? Because I think, you have witnessed quite a lot of this evolution in the world of experiential, which is obviously my jam. And I'd be interested if, can you any examples of those that you can point to that you were like, wow, this did it right, you know?
I don't know. It's too many. Honest, I don't want to be precious, but it's very hard for me to to pinpoint one.
Oh,
Uh, it is. It
yeah, I
is.
love
It
them
is.
all.
No, no, it is true. It is
It's
true.
true,
And
I get it.
also, no, it would be very hard. I mentioned a
Hmm.
couple in the course of the interview, so that we'll
Hmm.
have to do.
Hmm. Okay, fair
But
enough, fair enough.
yeah, yeah. But if I think about what I'm doing now, for
Hmm.
anyone who's interested in exploring creativity where I am. Anything that is AI lenses, it's something quite powerful for me, because you can say that our generation Z has got this main character attitude, like they want to be the protagonist of the story. With something so immediate of Gen AI lens, you can not just transform yourself into something, you can become that character, right? So that is super fascinating for me.
Super interesting. And kind of, what I find...
You see, I'm really thinking scale rather than one instance, if it makes sense.
No, I think that's one of the most interesting... Sorry, just a few things. One,
please.
When it comes to AR as an experience, one of my favorite examples, which I can be precious, but this one I think is worth sharing. And it wasn't even mine, I had nothing to do with it. But I don't know if you recall when Apple did this kind of ART, this art exhibition effectively at, I think, 7 cities around the world. I may be getting it wrong, but the one was obviously central London. And one of my favorite things about that project, it was amazing, 7 artists around the city, and you sort of discover them in the space. And that's a fascinating experience. And it's very much locked to a specific location, and it's the kind of revealing these magical things inside of a space that's there but isn't there. I love that kind of like peeking in through another dimension kind of idea. But my favorite piece of that was in Trafalgar Square. There was a Pipi Loti-Rees kind of video artwork, or sort of like flowing, beautiful text that revealed itself around the space. And my favorite bit wasn't just watching that; it was watching the people watching that, because it became this meta experience of, you've got this beautiful performance in space, and this kind of through the lens of the screen, effectively. But what you have is 12 people simultaneously in a choreographed performance following it. It was like a ballet, is the only way I could think of it. And it was, I wonder if the artist knew that would be the outcome. But for me, that was, it made this thing that was invisible super visible to everyone else around it because of the performative nature of the outcome. So I love that kind of one, because it pushes the boundaries of what you would expect AR to be. And that, to be honest, for me, was a turning point in my perspective on the potential and power of that kind of an experience. And I used to think, oh, nothing's better than the real world. But I still mostly...
you're announcing it, because again, every technology and their application, whilst they're being explored, land to the ideal use. And but again, one of the main differences between creating for VR versus AR is that, again, AR is just an enhancement of the real world. It doesn't take you away from that. As you said, you were very present.
100%, yeah.
VR instead is a different story. It's like, it's immersive, and we know what great applications are for it, gaming or immersive world, or even like education, training, it's
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's never, and what is interesting is like back to the knowledge piece, in Notre Dame de Paris, you have that sentence referred to the book, and it goes like, these will replace that, looking at the church. Ceci, toi, c'est là. And it never happens. There is always this idea, like doomsday has arrived, and this technology, like DVD, like
of course,
we'll replace, but it never happens, because the human layer will be there, and the best user will be developed. So it's very intriguing to be part of that. It's a very privileged position to be part of that.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm going to sort of slightly wind us down now, because I don't want to, your time is precious, and we want to make sure that we don't go over.
It's not a problem. We can go over.
Well, excellent. Well, then, to kind of ask you this question, which is, going back to your point around the technology doesn't necessarily replace the now. there's that fear factor that comes in that everybody's like, oh no, no, this thing's going to replace that. I love that as a kind of a sort of conceptual position to take, right? So that being said, vinyl disappeared, coming back. Like there is a technology there
Yeah,
that replaced people. You know, suddenly
yeah,
people weren't necessarily having to perform because you could play it off this little vinyl thing. Performance
yeah.
still continues, vinyl still exists. Tapes, well, tapes are an interesting technology
Did
that are
did you
flawed in some way. Sorry,
did you watch the Wim Wenders Perfect Day film?
no, that sounds
I think it's
interesting.
the title is Perfect Day, but basically it's the story of these guys, a janitor in Tokyo toilets, and he's
Uh-huh.
basically listening to tape all the time, and then there is an encounter with, a young teenager who's like, oh, intrigued, very intrigued, and he's like, they are coming back, they're coming back, and then there is this other scene in a music shop where you see that you can trade tape for quite a few
Mm,
bucks. So again, there's always this
interesting,
nostalgia element of it. I
for
see my
sure.
child
But
is 13 and now he's into the 90s dramatically,
It,
with his.
I mean, I agree the nostalgia plays a big part in this. Of course it does. But the fact of the matter is, even though it didn't replace the technology, it sure as hell takes market share from it. You know what I
Totally.
mean? So
Yeah.
even though, like, don't get me wrong, like I love that these things still exist. I'm very intrigued by my personal sort of obsession is in physical product that exists for a short period and then disappears. I think because so much deep love and attention to various detail goes into the development of a specific kind of product that all the blood, sweat, and tears of a Kickstarter designer has, put it on there and it comes out and it exists for like a year and then it totally fails.
Yeah.
And then you have this physical artifact that remains that doesn't really function anymore because the services no longer exist. Or if it's connected, if it's not connected, that's a different story. But they become these fascinating little artifacts on this journey to whatever the next thing is. And it reminds me a lot of Nokia. And Nokia recently sort of released their archives, which is a really great thing to browse if you were interested in the old school mobile phones. But they were a really interesting company because at the time they would explore so many different user interfaces for phones that was super ridiculous, absolutely the worst possible interface on the planet. But the fact that they took they gave it a shot, going back to what you said previously, they were like, well, let's try and put it out there and see what the market tells us or see what our users tell us. I mean, a bunch of those things just did not work, but they were willing to give it a shot and put it into the world as their test bed. I
Yeah.
found that so interesting and so important. And because we've sort of lost a lot of that in the world of smartphones, where everything's sort of just a monolithic screen. I really miss those days where there was such a willingness to like put the buttons in a circle or whatever the case may be and discover how terribly bad an idea that was. You know what I mean? Like, I
But
love
also,
that
I
stuff. So
guess people
yeah, go
people
ahead.
attention. Sorry, no, no. You want
No, no,
to
no, no, go ahead.
like people attention was different. The number of stimulus was different. The patience was different. You
Mm,
could take risks to engage,
hmm
and hoping for people to pay more attention, right?
mm. So on a slightly different note, and it's actually kind of goes back to something you said in the earlier part of the conversation, where you
Said
shared
so
more of your
many
history.
things.
I know. Well, which one is this that I'm talking about? So,
Ooh.
I actually, in my research, I did come across a lovely little reference from one of your colleagues who mentioned that you described you as someone who innately knows how to tease the best out of her team. And I thought that was a lovely thing to say about anyone. And it's the fact that they said this about you. I'd like you, if you don't mind sharing, what do you feel might be the secret sauce in inspiring the creativity and innovation within your teams?
The lovely comment. I didn't clock it. You reminding me of that. So I've tried to dig who was that person. So I guess in terms of leadership, and I guess that's independently from leading creative teams, I come to the conclusion that I have made certain key female leadership traits part of my daily. So it's trust. Trust is a gift value, and it puts you immediately in a position of exchange. I trust you, and it should be mutual. And so that is one element. There is the empathy, the ability of putting yourself in the shoes. There is the resilience, which sometimes people misunderstand for masochism. In reality, is the ability of identifying opportunities where others see obstacles. And then an element of integrity, right? So if you say this is the core values of our agreement, then we have a fertile ground. And to me, the key is probably my imprinting, which is I trust you. I trust you on be able to jump into that, call it white space for lack of better expression. And I realized that at the beginning, people were like, yeah, it's like, pirate, follow me, let's jump in the white space. And they're like, what the heck is she talking about, right? But the minute they embrace that, they understand that they can take risk. They can take risk because what we're focusing on is, yes, the call of duty towards the business, but also their own growth. What is it that they're interested in exploring? And we always make space for that. Then they have to take an action towards that, knowing that there will be some level of parachute. And again, back to my imprinting, we were asked to do things that we had no clue how to, but we always found a way to. And I think the exposure to say, like, is that what you want to do? Go. I'll be here to be bruised on your behalf, right? If anything happens, I mean, you're safe to make mistakes, and it's just like a safe environment, the one that we create in the team, meaning like back to the ability of expressing your opinion, right? You need to make sure that people feel safe and heard, so that for the creative brainstorm or coming up with solutions, they can put out there the most ridiculous idea, and nobody will ridicule them because it will be taken in consideration as an ingredient. So maybe that's how the lovely person, I don't know who it is, commented that referred to in terms of pushing, because you hold them accountable, you make them feel trusted and safe. But the world is the limit. Like they can do whatever they want.
I love that. That's I mean, wonderful traits to have in somebody who is effectively leading you. So I think, they obviously knew what they were talking about, and it was lovely to hear your perspective on that. So let's ask you the obvious question, which is around inspiring young emerging creatives who are potentially looking to make a mark for themselves in these creative industries. Do you have any recommendations or some advice for somebody starting out?
I'd say be curious and be flexible. One thing that I remind everyone is that I ended up doing jobs that didn't exist, all of us. So you never know what's coming, right? And so rather than trying to conform, experience a variety of things potentially, but start to be aware of what really interests you and drives you. And again, as we said, if you have to design a career, you can design it in decades, and you can think in terms of first decade craftsmanship, and then you go into strategy, and then you go into leadership, and you end up influencing, okay? But when you are in your 20s, it's very hard to think in decades. So just like be open, leap of faith, push yourself out of the comfort zone, because with that comes risk and fear, but a lot of learning.
That's such a great piece of advice. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, and also for being here on this lovely podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure, genuinely. And I will, in the show notes, I'll note a couple of links to the references and the quotes that you've shared, because I think they're really lovely to kind of capture here. Where can people find you? LinkedIn, I know.
That's a
Other
place,
places.
or Other places, where can they find me? In Indian Ocean, on my boat, you know.
Nice. When I go fishing. No, it's all good. I will share any kind of specific links on the show notes as well. Thank you once again for joining us, Valentina. It has been a real pleasure to have had you here and to discover some of your history in the space and honestly some of the overlap that I have experienced with some of that history, which is quite cool. For you, our listening audience, if you are interested in following Valentina, you can find the links in the show notes, also to any links to things that were mentioned during the conversation. We really want to know that people are enjoying the content that we're creating, and by either liking it or commenting on it or, goodness me, subscribing to it. That is a small way that you can do this for us. Thank you all once again for listening and for joining us. Be happy and well wherever you are in the world. Cheerio until next time.